Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of The Journeymen, a podcast dedicated to the work of overlooked and underrated filmmakers. On each episode, we pick a director who we feel more or less fits that description and work our way chronologically through their entire filmography. My name's Michael Pattison. I'm here once again with my co-host,
Bobby Lowe.
You can follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen. Subscribe to us through SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, and or iTunes. And this episode is our second of a two-part special on George P. Cosmatos, which was originally recorded as part of our previous podcast, The Habitus, and aired on 11th of June 2018. Picking up where we left off on the last episode, we'll be discussing on this episode Rambo First Blood Part 2, which Cosmatos made in 1985, and then Cobra 1986, Leviathan 1989, Tombstone 1993, and Shadow Conspiracy 1997.
Okay, so somewhat surprisingly, I still couldn't find any information on anything that he was doing in between Of Unknown Origin and his next film, which kind of catapulted him into the big leagues, Rambo First Blood Part 2.
It was a lie, wasn't it? Just like the whole damn war. It was a lie.
What are you talking about?
That camp was supposed to be empty. Rambo goes in, a decorated vet. He finds no POWs. The Congress buys it, case closed. And if he happens to get caught, nobody knows he's alive except you and your computers. And you can reprogram that, can't you?
Who the hell do you think you're talking to, Troutman?
A stinking bureaucrat that's trying to cover his ass.
No, not just mine, Troutman. We're talking about a nation's. Besides, it was your hero's fault. Now, if your warrior had gone in, done what the hell he was supposed to do, we'd be out of this clean and simple. He was just supposed to take pictures.
And if those pictures showed something, they would have been lost, wouldn't they?
Oh, Troutman, I still don't think you understand what this is all about.
The same as it always is. Money. In 72, we were supposed to pay the Kong $4.5 billion in war reparations. We reneged. They kept the POWs. And you're doing the same thing all over again.
What the hell would you do, Troutman? Pay blackmail money to ransom our own men and finance the war effort against our allies? What if some burnout POW shows up on the 6 o'clock news? What do you want to do? Start the war all over again? You want to bomb Hanoi? Want everybody screaming for armed invasion? You think somebody's going to get up on the floor of the United States Senate and ask for billions of dollars for a couple of forgotten ghosts?
Men, goddammit! Men who fought for their country.
That's enough! Troutman, I'm going to forget this conversation ever took place.
You bastard.
And if I were you, I'd never make the mistake of bringing this subject up again.
You're the one who's making the mistake.
Yeah, what mistake?
Rambo.
Okay, so Rambo First Blood Part 2 was released in 1985, written by Sylvester Stallone, its star with James Cameron, and based on a story by Kevin Jarre, produced by Buzz Feitshans for Coralco Pictures. At the start of the film, Vietnam War veteran John Rambo, last seen on cinema screens in Ted Kotcheff's 1982 film First Blood, is released from prison by federal order and, recruited by his old trusted superior Colonel Troutman, played by Richard Crenna, on behalf of US government official Marshal Murdoch, Charles Napier. He is tasked he's tasked with a reconnaissance mission behind the former enemy lines in Vietnam War now over, of course, well over, regarding a potential prisoner of war camp still holding missing in action US soldiers. Rambo being Rambo, upon finding the camp and discovering that the prisoners are being held captive in wartime conditions, etc., rescues one of them and is himself captured along the way after Murdoch orders his extraction to be aborted. And falls prey, Rambo, to the Soviets, or more specifically to Lieutenant Colonel Podolsky, played by Steven Berkoff, and so he has to fight his own way out of the base, etc., etc. This is a film I knew from childhood, dating back to when I first discovered First Blood, which I watched with my dad, who was also a fan of that film. And it's weird because as a youngin, I used to prefer the Rambo sequels to Kotcheff's original. Now I feel that Kotcheff's is a masterpiece, and I haven't seen Rambo 3 in many, many years. I suspect I wouldn't like it as much, if at all. I've always had and I didn't like. Was it just Rambo, the fourth one?
Yeah.
Yeah, just Rambo. I didn't like that at all. Like, I hated that film. Well overdue a rewatch. Now that my more regressive political side has been unearthed through the habit.
We're getting the fifth one as well.
Oh yeah, we're getting a fifth
one.
They start
shooting in September, I think.
Yeah, that's right. But over the years, right, although I've mellowed on the sequels, hated the fourth one, I've always had a soft spot for the second.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this a great deal, actually. It's set against the backdrop of, well, it doesn't really have a specific name, right? This period of this sort of post-Vietnam period where U.S. relations with the Vietnamese, became relatively more peaceable, and it sort of attempts were made to sort of open up the territory in order to, extract prisoners of war, etc., etc., those missing in action, presumed dead, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Do you know
I
much more about that?
I saw this once years ago, but not as a kid. I didn't see it as a kid. I saw it maybe when I was, I don't know, in my mid-20s, early 20s maybe. Right. I don't know. I saw 2 and 3 pretty close together, and I went back and watched both of them again before this, and I liked this more than I remembered liking it. If memory serves, I watched it when I was kind of sleepy, which I know you did as well for this as well.
I'll come. Okay, so full confession on here now. I got in from having comfortably proceeded through double-digit tallies of a double-digit tally of Guinness, pints of Guinness, and I thought it would be a good idea to continue the evening when I got in by doubling up with some homework for the Habitus by watching or rewatching Rambo 2. First 40 minutes, I'm thinking, this is absolutely amazing. Like, wow, what a film. How have I been, how have I not championed this to the degree that it obviously deserves to be all these years? And then next thing I know, I wake up on the bed, laptop still on, still open, film long finished, and I don't really remember what point. At that time when I wake up, I don't know at what point I nodded off. So then the next day I had to rewatch it, of course. And, well, I don't think it's, the masterpiece that I thought it was after having 12 or so Guinnesses. But it's weird. It's a weird one. I really like it. Like, not much seems to happen. Like,
well, in relation to what you asked me before, sorry, when I watched it, the first thing that I sort of thought of and asked myself was, like, what's the truth behind this? Because I had never heard of this notion of, prisoners of war in Vietnam in the mid-'80s, when American involvement in the Vietnam conflict ended in 1973. Sure. You're talking about, like, 12 plus years in this, like, jungle prison. It's such a nightmarish prospect. And on researching it, like, it kind of falls into the kind of category of conspiracy theory, that there's like the American government has colluded with the Vietnamese government to cover up the existence of these POWs and MIAs. But I don't know. I mean, there was an investigation into it in the early 90s that concluded that there's no evidence that these people exist. But who knows? So the thing that struck me on a rewatch was, because I also rewatched First Blood, which I agree is a really great film. I love that film. Is that First Blood builds very, very, very slowly to its explosive action climax. Mm-hmm. The opening shot of this film is an explosion when he's working in the quarry. So it's like, right from the get-go, it's going to be... It's almost as though in First Blood we're told so much about Rambo's prowess as a commando, or Green Beret rather, in Vietnam, that they want, like, it's almost like doing a prequel without doing a prequel. It's like we want to see him. We want to see him doing that. So, well, we could do a prequel. We could, but that would mean going back and set, like, he should be like 15 years younger or whatever. So we'll just do a sequel. We'll send him in as this kind of, like, on this Black Ops mission. Which is supposed to be a reconnaissance mission. He's not supposed to actually engage anybody, but obviously that doesn't pan out.
He was supposed to take photos. What about orders?
And that's the other interesting thing that differentiates it from the first one, is that in this one we see him paired up with somebody. He's not solo anymore. He's paired up with a Vietnamese contact named Ko, who speaks in very artificial broken English, where she just like omits random like verbs and things like that.
Yep. Played by Julia Nixon, one of the all-time great performances.
Yes, I fully agree. He's also saved by Ko at one point.
Yeah,
which is like nobody's there to save him in First Blood, so it's very much like we'll team him up with somebody, and it's the same in Rambo 3. He gets teamed up with some of the Afghani freedom fighters. So Rambo 2 and 3 are interesting in the sense that they're both effectively anti-communist films. They're both they both put Rambo in the context of like a U.S. Soviet Union proxy conflict.
Yeah.
First in Vietnam and then in Afghanistan. And Rambo 3 has this, like, the first half of Rambo 3 is pretty bad. It's like it has this really almost like sanctimonious kind of saccharine tone, where it's like Rambo just hanging out with these, like, the Afghani freedom fighters and showing you how great these people are. And one thing that I probably respond less to about the second one than I do about the first one is the actual setting and the feeling. Like, so you've got like the sort of the kind of lush alpine setting of like the Pacific Northwest in the first one, which is set in Oregon, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then this one is like the kind of the humid, sweaty, Southeast Asian jungle. Which one appeals to you more?
Oh, definitely. Well, I'm a city boy, so definitely the urban terrain that the first one climaxes in, but also that small town, like, as you said, like mountainous terrain around that.
Basically, any film set in that kind of setting immediately has an advantage with me. So like 80s thrillers that I like way more than the average person likes, like things like Shoot to Kill, aka Deadly Pursuit with Sidney Poitier and Tom Berenger. Just the fact that it's set in that kind of landscape makes it a good film for me, And like my favorite episode of the X-Files as well is Darkness Falls, and it's all set in that kind of landscape. But yeah, I love Predator, and I had never realized how much of a First Blood cash-in Predator is. Like, it's really not. Sorry, it's a Rambo cash-in. So it takes elements from both First Blood and a lot from Rambo 2. Like, in First Blood Part 1, where the National Guard are coming into the forest to apprehend Rambo, and Rambo is like he's doing the same thing that Arnold Schwarzenegger does. He's like creating these weird like booby traps out of the trees and like the spikes and all sorts of stuff. And then there's also in the second one
when he smothers mud over himself.
Exactly, like, the mud part,
disguises himself as an extension of the tree bark. He's like, I've written here, like, he's a trickster strategist. Like, at the very end of the film, when he's in the helicopter, pretending to be asleep.
Pretending to be knocked unconscious.
To be knocked unconscious. Yeah,
that's great.
Oh yeah, suddenly grabs the bazooka and you got explosive arrows in this as well. Because we should say, like, so when he lands in the jungle, it's by mistake that his parachute gets trapped, or in the when he jumps out of the plane, and he needs to be cut free, and in doing so they also cut free his equipment, so he's armed with very little. He's just got his trademark knife, which also gets a credit in the like knife designed by such and such.
Oh, really?
Credits. And he has explosive arrows. Well, he acquires the explosive arrows, I think, somewhere along the way. But the sequence where all hell's being let loose, like Cosmatos is on like his distillation of action space into images that are almost like tableau vivants. Like, so you'll get like almost like a still photograph of Rambo with an arrow, and then cut to a scene of it just fucking exploding. It's quite like creative. And
the scene where he shoots the guy who's just standing on the rock, and that's great. The action is great. The action is really impressive. The way that the action scenes are constructed as like escalations. Like this, like the first really impressive one, I think, is the one on the boat on the river
with the other boat.
With the other boat, and there's like this like logical
yeah.
kind of like, you know, because I mean they kill the people on the other boat, but then the boat is, you know, unmanned but still moving, and then that becomes the new threat, and you have this escalation of the, you know, escalation to the boat exploding, and then the helicopter arrives, and then he starts using the explosive arrows. I think it's actually at the end of that scene where he shoots the guy, blows him up. Yeah. Have you seen the Chuck Norris films, Missing in Action? Which
no.
I think, did they come out before this? Or I think they did.
I think it's, I think
before? It's maybe the year before this.
I thought it was after. Oh, really? Okay.
Let me just check.
I thought it was after. I thought it followed suit.
No, yeah, the year before. Yeah.
Okay.
84. I haven't seen them either.
But do you, you know, like when the carnage ensues in the final sort of the climactic sequence, let's say, if like it doesn't feel like, or doesn't seem to be like a revenge film, or like even like a survival film in the mode that the first one was operating in. But do you feel like when all of a sudden, like, you know, he's in a helicopter and he's got a suddenly endless supply of villages and buildings to blow up, do you feel like his like dormant trauma has been triggered, and it's just like a madman, or do you think that we're meant to be seeing a certain logic or purpose to the violence?
I definitely think Rambo's a less interesting character in this than he is in the first one.
Oh yeah,
like much less. And I think what kind of knocks the film down a notch for me is how kind of humorless it is. Like, I know that it has gags, arguably gags, like the exploding arrow just completely detonating the guy.
Yeah.
But Rambo himself, Stallone's performance in this is very kind of dull. I think it's
I actually prefer him.
I actually prefer him. No, but in First Blood, he's the context within which that's happening. I think it works, you know, and he has like Brian Dennehy, you know, and a greater presence from Richard Crenna as Troutman, you know, to offset that. But like, yeah, no, I agree that in the first one it's quite a muted and kind of one note sort of performance, but in this one he's kind of asked to do more. Like he's asked to sort of cordially interact with Co and all that kind of stuff. And the romantic thing is towards the end. It's like, no, it just doesn't work. And
but he you know, she does make an impact on him, because when she is gunned down, he does take her necklace and tie it around his own.
And he has it in the third one, which is giving it to one of the Afghani kids.
A nice touch. Oh, does he? Yeah. I forgot about that. No, I think, you know, Stallone is still sort of finding his feet as a comic actor, and obviously warming himself up for Cobra, which we'll get to, because he's obviously very funny in that. But in this, yeah, you're right. There's no real humor. What do you make of Charles Napier as like the antagonist? Because Dennehy's great in the first. I absolutely love Dennehy. I love his troops as well in the first. Like David Caruso, the very underrated David Caruso. Green Beret! Napier's great as Murdoch.
I think, like, we're about halfway through the film when the Russians arrive.
Yeah, it's
I have 49 minutes.
46 minutes when Berkoff shows up as Podofsky.
I have 49. You must have watched the TV edit, did you? I don't know. Like,
I know.
We don't get the main antagonist until.
Yeah. I know why you're bringing him up, because I mentioned like Charles Napier as the antagonist. That like the you know, the bureaucrat who ultimately is the cause of all of this. I mean, Berkoff is, of course, the one who needs to be blown up, and I think he's great. I think he's like mint. Put it in his eye. But like Charles Napier as Murdoch back at base is like the scheming government official who machinates the aborted excavation plan, etc., etc.
Hmm.
So what would you give this?
I'd probably give it like a 7.
Yeah,
I like it, but it like First Blood for me is a 9, and the third one is a 5, and the fourth one is a 6. But I haven't rewatched that. I'm going to rewatch. I meant to rewatch it, but I didn't have time. Yeah, isn't it funny how? You know what? Never mind. Well, this is more relevant to Cobra, so we'll talk about that in the next segment.
All right, let's move on. It's a 7 for me as well, but yeah, I'm happy to move on.
Okay, all right. So his next film followed hot on the heels of Rambo 2 and reteamed him with Sylvester Stallone and was 1986's Cobra.
You want to go to hell? Huh? Huh, pig? You want to go to hell with me? Doesn't matter, does it? We are the hunters. We kill the weak, so the strong survive. You can't stop the new world. Your filthy society will never get rid of people like us. It's breeding them. We are the future!
No! Your history.
You won't do it, pig. You won't shoot. Murder is against the law. You have to take me in. If you can. Even I have rights. Don't I? Pig. Take me in. They'll say I'm insane. Won't they? The court is civilized, isn't it? Pig.
But I'm not. This is where the law stops. And I start. Sucker.
Okay, so Cobra, produced by Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus of the infamous Canon Group, who we talked a little bit about on our episode when we talked about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2.
This is just becoming an advert for previous episodes.
So this one was written by Sylvester Stallone and based on the 1978 novel Fair Game by Paula Gosling. So the basic setup here is when traditional methods of police investigation into a series of mysterious killings in the Los Angeles area fails to yield any results, renegade loose cannon cop Marion Cabretti, also known as the Cobra, is put on the case and ends up having to protect and guard a witness, a material witness to one of the killings, and discovers that the people perpetrating the killings are involved in a mysterious cult of some kind, and that's more or less it, right?
Yeah, an axe-wielding cult.
Right. So I'll start with what I was going to say at the end of the previous segment, in that I think it's weird that Stallone obviously is not shy about making sequels and revisiting his beloved characters. I wish that this had sequels. Like I would happily trade everything after Rocky IV. I'd trade Rocky 5, 6, and 7 for Cobra 2, 3, and 4, you know. I'd trade Rambo 4. I'd trade Rambo 3 and 4 for Cobra 2 and 3, you know. This is such a great character, and it's such a great like the style of the film, which I think was very influential on like Nicholas Winding Refn. Like there's a lot of that, like the neon and the like high color contrasts and the synth score and everything like that. And I think Stallone's really good in this. I think he's really, really good. And I love the horror element as well. Like even like down to the, like we have a character named the Night Slasher. We have this weird cult who we never really learn that much about. Cobra is part of something called the Zombie Squad, which is like the bottom line, like the last people you call, just like the kind of the blunt instruments to get the job done that no one else wants to do, and like all that kind of thing. Yeah, no, I'm really, really fond of this movie.
I thought it was generally better thought of than it is. I mean, it has a sort of cult following.
Yeah,
but
it's
I
a
thought it was
cult favorite.
But I thought it was genuinely and generally regarded as like an action 80s or an 80s action classic, and it isn't.
No,
it's weird because I hadn't seen it before, and I very much enjoyed it. I think Brian Thompson as a night slasher is terrific.
Yeah.
Bridget Nielsen's amazing as Ingrid, the witness in Protection. Yeah. And I agree, like Stallone has a comic dimension here
and
that's
a charisma and a rapport with both Bridget Nielsen and with his partner Gonzalez, played by is that Rennie Santoni? And I know Andrew. Sorry, is it Brian? I know Brian Thompson, who plays the Night Slasher here, as the alien bounty hunter from the X-Files, and I know Rennie Santoni from Seinfeld, from playing Poppy, the guy who owns the restaurant.
Oh yeah,
So like, so that little,
amazing,
people who would go on to star in a couple of my favorite '90s shows. But yeah, no, he has a great rapport with him, and we got a lot of little like neat character details, like the feminine name when he reveals that his name is Marion, and I don't know, he plays it all really well, and there's a nice rapport between him and Bridget Nielsen. With Gonzalez, we have this whole thing where he's addicted to sugar. he keeps eating like chocolate and candy and stuff. Let me ask you a question. Did this film make you want a Pepsi?
Absolutely. I mean, it's his partner's actually drinking Coca-Cola in the scene that he tells Bridget Nielsen to whisper something in Cobra's ear.
Yeah.
But the Pepsi signs
are everywhere.
The apartment block.
Yeah. And big Pepsi vending machines taking up half the frame, and it's a really funny,
amazing shot when he's in the supermarket right at the beginning, like, which is the scene that has no real bearing on the rest of the plot.
No, it's like a character introduction scene.
He guards himself from behind a Pepsi vending machine, and what is he? He drinks a
Coors. Yeah. He actually stops and drinks a Coors. I mean, like, a supermarket is just like the perfect place if you want to. If you have like product placement deals with all these companies, there's no better place to set your opening action scene than a supermarket.
Absolutely.
And at least you get your really brazen product placement out of the way in the opening 5 minutes.
But the fact that the Pepsi neon sign is on his own apartment block as well, it's amazing. I mean, that action sequence that takes place on that sort of balcony area.
But what about I think it's actually shortly when he goes home after. I think it's when he goes home after the supermarket thing, and he cuts the pizza slice with the scissors and
with a
yeah. But then he turns on the TV and we watch an entire Toys R Us ad, and then the news plays and gives us the plot information.
I know, it's amazing. You mentioned the like neon and the influence on probably Refn.
I've actually heard Refn reference this film.
Oh yeah,
it is.
Also it's confirmed, right? But it's distilled into the Pepsi sign in particular because the whole thing has a blue pink contrast. Like it's like cyan and magenta. It's almost like a graphic novel almost at times, and it has a really, really beautiful, like, steely cold palette punctuated by like summery neon pinks. It took actually from the opening images and opening scene in the film, I didn't realize it was LA set, and I was enthralled to discover soon after that it was LA set, because like when we first started to see the exteriors, I thought, oh, it must be like Miami, Florida or something, but then it's obviously like Santa Monica. And because I've been to Los Angeles, I love the iconography there, but it underplays it as well. I mean, and as part of the plot, this witness protection plot, they also escape Los Angeles. They go upstate to San Remos, which there's a great action sequence there as well. That's incredibly tense. When the climactic sequence, I guess, when they realize that they're going to be besieged by this whole horde of
Yeah, we should say one of the
killers.
cult members is a police officer who is actually assigned to the case,
Yeah.
and she calls in their location from the motel that they're staying at.
But I'm a fan in general of like safe house milieus and is that such a thing? and witness protection narratives, like the obvious one. I
Like
love
A History of
Witness.
Violence.
Right, fucking go back, listeners, and listen to our History of Violence segment on a few episodes back, and listen to my segment-long gaffe resulting from a misreading of the film's plot. No, but coming back to this, you mentioned Officer Starks as the mole, if you like, the insider, who's the cop who is also part of this gang. How she got into being a cop, we'll never know. How she got into the gang, we'll never know. But it adds just a real menace, that kind of complication to this kind of plot, because there's a dramatic irony that we know that she's a villain.
Yeah.
Cobra kind of cottons on to the fact that something's not quite right in the restaurant or diner.
In the diner,
she's
he starts
on the phone constantly.
Yeah. And then he catches her. He catches her outside the motel in the middle of the night making a call.
But all of that's heightened by at the same time as that, Bridget Nielsen and Stallone are beginning to develop some kind of rapport that he's trying to resist for professional reasons because he has a job at hand. And it just adds to the stakes very well in a very economic fashion. An extremely economic film, by the way. I mean, the opening sequence lasts, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
And the film's only 87.
Yeah.
So it's like 77 minutes time of plot there.
Yeah, that's with credits. I mean, it's very lean.
Indeed.
And that leads into my only criticism of the film is that I think it's probably too lean. Like I could definitely do with 10 more minutes, giving us more time with the cult. That's the only thing, because like when you get to the end of the film in the foundry, and we have Brian Thompson, like as in the clip I just played there, we hear his confrontation with Cobra, and he's so
great
good.
voice.
His voice is so great. The way he spits the word pig, and
Pig.
the way that he dies as well. He's so gruesome and excessive and like brilliantly symbolic, where he's hoisted up and impaled on the hook, and the hook carries him into what looks like the mouth of the devil. He's like carried into this, like, it's almost like he's fed to his god or whatever. We never find out who the cult is, and that's the kind of the only problem with the film for me, is that not necessarily because you need to know, but because as antagonists in a film like this, it's extremely unusual. Generally, the antagonist in a film like this, whether like a rogue cop who's like, a loose cannon, they're going to be like, drug dealers or gun runners or maybe terrorists or something like that, or crooked cops or something like that. This is like straight out of a horror film. Here you have this sinister cult that worships something or other and has all these rituals and is performing what are effectively human sacrifices. And I think they missed an opportunity here, because if they had made sequels to this, you could have continued with that. You could have had a sort of horror-inflected action franchise with Sylvester Stallone where it would have been really unique, and you could have continued that kind of really dark subject matter. It's a pity. You wouldn't necessarily have to have gone supernatural with it or anything like that, but to keep it in that kind of vein, like maybe to do a serial killer story with something, more Silence of the Lambs style operatic kind of over the top horror. I don't know. It seems like a bit of a missed opportunity, because it was a hit as well. The movie wasn't a flop. I actually thought that the reason that they didn't make sequels was that it was a flop, but it only cost $25 million and it made $160 million worldwide. So I guess maybe that was considered a disappointment after, because Stallone was the biggest box office draw of 1985 because he had Rambo 2 and Rocky 4 that year. So like I don't know what their combined gross was, but maybe Cobra was supposed to be kind of performing on that level and didn't. But it seems a bit unfair to expect.
It's strange. I mean, so early on I was worrying a little bit, because as much as I was enjoying the film, even in that opening scene, I much prefer Stallone, and I think he works best as an underdog, right? And to see him play an actual agent of the law seemed a bit odd. and a bit strange. And so I agree. I think the introduction of that kind of antagonist, firstly a pervasive one, and secondly like a one that'll go to weirdly unprecedented or unhuman or inhumane levels of violence or whatever else, works to the film's advantage in bringing Stallone around to something resembling, not out of his depth, but the stakes
it's a challenge.
Equal. Yeah, it's a challenge.
It's like we see him, the way that he deals with the guy at the beginning in the opening scene, we see that like that's just not, it's not even, he's not going to break a sweat doing anything like that. And you can imagine that kind of situation being scaled up and up and up, and him still kind of handling it pretty well, like a warehouse full of drug dealers or whatever, that kind of thing. Typical kind of cop action thriller scenario. He's a little bit too he's a little bit too larger than life for the standard antagonist. But I think that I also like the rapport between Stallone and Andrew Robinson in this, who I know best as the Scorpio Killer from Dirty Harry and as the father from Hellraiser, who plays basically plays his opposite within the police department. He plays the by the book, like let's kind of take it softly, and let's try to minimize the body count and the property damage. And they have this kind of like antagonistic relationship. Because like everything about the movie seems to be that it was like setting itself up for a series. Like even the fact that he has like a signature car, it's almost like the Batmobile that has. We find out later in the excellent car chase. It even has like a nitrous boost thing, and has like fighter jet seatbelts and all this kind of stuff. It's really like they put a lot of effort into designing this car purely just for this one car chase. It's like I said about the action sequences in several of the films that we've talked about so far. Cosmatos was a great action director. Like he constructs these action scenes and escalates them and fills them with little interesting details really expertly. And there's like all of those details and like the physicality, the awareness of the physical like heft and shape and like body of the car, the variation in like thinking through the car chase sequence and thinking about all of the opportunities to do slightly different things with each kind of beat within the sequence, and keeping all of it clear and not kind of fundamentally confusing. It's all he's. I really think he's an excellent and underrated action director.
I agree. You mentioned with regard to Drive, I'm presuming it was Drive that Refn said Cobra was an influence on. Or was it? I mean, it couldn't possibly have been Neon Demon or Only God Forgives, or maybe it was in terms of look. But,
I mean, in terms of just the synth and the neon and all that kind of stuff, yeah, I don't know.
Sure, yeah.
Probably Drive from early, I don't know.
I also wondered very early on if the killing sequence was a precursor to Zodiac, where we just get like two or three sequences of just the gang just like killing people in their cars and stuff. But also, you mentioned Cosmatos as a wonderful action director. The old-fashioned economy with which he portrays like villains. He's got the whole boot fetish thing going on, that Hitchcockian thing where like a villain will leave his car and we'll only see the camera angles will only show his boots entering the store, etc., etc. It's all like kind of nuts and bolts stuff, but it works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And just like that extra edge of nastiness to it as well, like that mid-80s, like, I don't know. I mean, it's very easy to throw terms around like this, but like this Reaganite sensationalism that gives rise to like police vigilantism. I mean, we haven't even touched upon like the politics of the movie or anything like that, but I mean, it's an exciting film about like a regressive institution, basically.
Yeah.
So this is the first film.
I mean, sorry, but the Andrew Robinson character, like I mentioned, he was the Scorpio killer in Dirty Harry. I mean, like Dirty Harry was well before the Reagan era, you know.
Sure. Sure.
And you mentioned Zodiac, like, you know, obviously in Zodiac, the Scorpio killer is modeled on the Zodiac killer, but yeah, that's it.
This is. So I guess this is the first 8 I'm going to give on this episode. I'm guessing it's your second 8.
It's my third 8 after Massacre in Rome, Unknown Origin, but yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So I promise I will have some interesting tidbits about unproduced, unrealized projects very shortly, but I don't have them yet. So we'll move straight into his next film, 1989's Leviathan.
It's growing. It's had a meal.
It needs blood?
Apparently.
That's just great. You're telling me we got a goddamn Dracula in here with us?
That's why that one on the ship was dead and needed blood.
Wait a minute, what one on that ship?
Somebody want to let the rank and file in on your little secret?
Whatever it is, it appears to be a genetic aberration.
No shit.
What are you trying to tell us, Doc? It has all the characteristics of deep-sea marine life. Scales, gills, regeneration, even a period of dormancy. But the fact that it remembered where that plasma was stored seems to imply that it has some other quality.
What? It absorbs the intelligence of its victim.
Intelligence may not be the right word.
Hey, to hell with semantics, Doc. What are you saying now? This thing is like part De Jesus, part six-pack, part Bowman, what?
I don't know. I'd just be guessing. But I do know this. The Russians deliberately sank that ship to protect themselves. Maybe to protect us all.
Okay, so Leviathan, not to be confused, by the way, with its immersive non-fiction namesake put out by Harvard's sensory ethnography lab a few years back, or for that matter, Andrei Zvyagintsev feature, which was made even more recently, was released in 1989. Produced by Aurelio and Luigi De Laurentiis and Charles and Lawrence Gordon. Written by David Webb Peoples and Jeb Stewart, distributed by MGM, and it opens 16,000 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean on a seabed mining vessel tasked with excavating silver and other precious metals, run by geologist Stephen Beck, played by Peter Weller, who supervises a motley crew consisting of Dr. Thompson, Richard Crenna, Elizabeth Williams, Amanda Pays, Six-Pack Parrish, played by Daniel Stern, Justin Jones, played by Ernie Hudson, De Jesus Rodero, Michael Carmine, Bridget Bowman, Lisa Eilbacher, and J.P. Cobb, Hector Elizondo. We join them on day 87 of a 90-day shift, where patience is wearing thin, to say the least, understandably so, I think. And then they discover a Soviet shipwreck named Leviathan, from which they take several documents as well as, a bottle of vodka, which of course turns out not to be a bottle of vodka, but a bottle of water, which of course turns out not to be water exactly, but, something else, which contaminates Six-Pack firstly, then Bowman, and before we know it, there's a transmogrifying creature on board. That's what I got anyway. That's how they get contaminated, right?
Yeah, it's not made entirely clear, but that's what they speculate is happening.
Yeah.
We never get full confirmation about it, but yeah.
Yeah. In the Atlantic Ocean, nobody can hear you scream.
Do you think the fact that Daniel Stern loots a sunken ship is where he got the idea for the Wet Bandits?
The Wet Bandits. Yeah, maybe. Although he very much becomes a sticky bandit soon after infection, and much more besides. I really like this film. I mean, I made a reference there to Alien, the tagline from the film, which precedes this by 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you have problems with overly comparing films to other films and saying it's a rip-off or a knockoff or whatever else. This
no, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with
qualities.
saying that. I have a problem with the implication that in itself is a criticism. That this is clearly a cash in on Alien and the Thing. Like it's Alien meets the
Right,
Thing
yeah.
at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
The thing that annoys me about the commentary on this film is that I've lost count of the amount of times that I've read that it's a knockoff of The Abyss, which came out after this. You know, it's like it should take you 10 seconds to confirm.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but like there were a
absolutely. I
couple
haven't
of
seen The
films
Abyss
the same year. There was also Sean Cunningham, who's best known for directing Friday the 13th and producing Last House on the Left. His film Deep Star 6, which is the same thing. It's the bottom of the ocean. It's a alien creature or whatever. And there's also a lesser known film called Lords of the Deep, and these all came out in 1989, which is a weird coincidence. And what might have happened is that the studios might have seen that James Cameron's next film was a deep sea sci-fi thriller, and then quickly looked around and said, okay, well, what do we have lying around here that is in that vein?
Yeah.
And greenlit and fast tracked a bunch of films that are in a kind of similar vein. But that is not the same thing as saying that these films are influenced by The Abyss, because the screenwriters and directors of these films couldn't possibly have seen The Abyss in 1986 when they wrote these screenplays.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, but have you seen The Abyss?
No, I haven't. No.
I haven't seen it in years. I don't really, but it's not a horror film. Like these other ones are horror films.
Right.
Yeah.
What's The Abyss? I always understood it to be a horror film.
No, it's a sci-fi thriller. It's about, and I think it's, if my memory serves right, it's closer to something like Close Encounters. It's like they encounter aliens, but they're not, malevolent. They're not monsters.
Right. I always assumed that they were, which might say more about me than it does the film. But
I might be misremembering, but I don't think it's a horror film.
The funny thing with the Leviathan is that, we're told at the outset that it's 87 days into a 90-minute shift. I mean, it's, arbitrary figures. It could be like 27 days into a 30-day shift or whatever. It's kind of meaningless.
He said 87. He said 87 days into a 90-minute shift.
Well, at the bottom of the ocean, time is compressed, of course. Time implodes. What always strikes me as inherently daft, and you have to roll with it in these kinds of films, is the kinds of members that they've put together for this excavation mission, which is a scientific endeavor, and they're just a bunch of arseholes, who are bickering, who are who stretch credulity and everything else with regard to how the hell did these guys get through any kind of educational requirement in order to get onto this vessel. But that's obviously the joy early on of characterization and who's going to get eaten or infected first, or transformed or whatever. Obviously Richard Crenna returns. I mean, in even more obvious ways Peter Weller does, but Crenna's it's a weird turn by Crenna, because he's the Doctor who is kind of absent for the first scene, where a character almost dies because his underwater suit almost implodes.
Yeah.
Because of the pressure, problem with the pressure, and the Doctor on board. Doesn't he say he'll be playing golf tomorrow or something like that? He's just whatever.
Yeah.
I might be around, I might not be around.
It's weird. It's a funny piece of characterization, because they've set up that he's insubordinate and that he has this checkered past where something some sort of drug that he developed or whatever it was. Anyway, he's on this vessel because he was this prestigious whatever leading medical scientist or something like that. But ultimately it comes to nothing, and it's just used later on to justify his opinion being disregarded by his superior when he talks about evacuating the research what's it called? The research base or whatever.
Yeah, the mining vessel they're on, you mean?
No, I mean, what's the correct term for a research
hub?
Hub?
Base? Yeah,
whatever.
Base,
okay.
Yeah.
I actually, speaking of my memory of The Abyss, I had misremembered the antagonists or the monsters in this as being aliens.
Oh, you'd seen this before?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
But I thought that it was, that it was some sort of crashed alien ship that they encountered. Not that it was
it's a
Russian ship that they were carrying out some sort of they were carrying out some sort of genetic experiments on the sailors on board. And it got out of hand, and they deliberately sunk the ship.
Yeah, so early scenes unfold with sort of MacGuffin-like conversations about like company stocks, etc., etc., and then like you've got that classic focus pull to something creature based on the ceiling or elsewhere in the room, a little bit like of unknown origin, where we're aware that something's happening before the characters are, because like they bring like a crab on board, right?
Yeah.
Like a seabed crab, which is under Daniel Stern's pillar 6-pack. But that's because I thought, oh well, this is like a creature that's going to grow or something. But actually, that's a red it's a red herring, right?
I don't know if it's as much a red herring. I took it to be more of a reference to Alien, because the thing looks so like a facehugger.
It does. Yeah,
there's even a scene where they're playing pranks on each other, where Daniel Stern's character puts it inside one of the suits that is a Bowman who has to inspect. She's walking along and she's opening all the suits, and this live creature comes out of the suit, and then later on he goes to bed and he lies down in his bunk, and he has like all these like like centerfold pictures stuck to the underside of the bunk above, and he actually says something like "sit on my face."
Yeah,
and then he reaches behind the pillow and pulls out the dead creature. But like there are loads, like it's so much, like it's so consciously The Thing meets Alien. You've got like the flamethrowers, you've got like the whole thing about the creature going for the blood supply, it's all from The Thing. You've got like all the biomorphic imagery. You've got the computer that they talk to, what do they call the computer in this one? Do you remember? No?
No.
Mother in Alien. You have all the talk about the company and all that sort of stuff, which is like it's called Tri-Oceanic in this one. They're expendable to the company the same way that the astronauts in or the space truckers or whatever you want to call them in Alien are expendable to the company in that film.
The company here is represented by Ms. Martin, played by Meg Foster, who has very piercingly blue eyes, astonishingly blue eyes, who is painted with all kinds of shade and borderline malevolence, even before it turns out that they really are expendable to her and the company. It's a really, really funny film, this. It has a laugh, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. Like when it's established that there is some sort of creature on board, right? And Jones, Ernie Hudson, doesn't creep up onto Jesus, but he inevitably shocks him because he's behind him in the room, and Jesus understandably completely shits himself. Ernie Hudson's like, "Hey man, everybody's jumpy." It's like, yeah, fucking too right. But one of the funniest moments for me, and we mentioned something earlier with like a Kuleshov effect in another film. Was it Escape to? No, it was Cassandra Crossing. Just to come back to that,
the Kuleshov effect weren't you talking about the rat in Of Unknown Origin?
Yes, perhaps, but I said we'll come back to it to another moment in Leviathan. Sorry, it's long episode of recording here, so by this point we're all a bit jaded. Thanks for staying with us if you got here so far. But it's the moment when Stern is obviously suffering some kind of, his body's undergoing some kind of change, and he looks like shit, and Krenner sees to him, tends to him. They put some sort of DNA into the computer, and generic alteration or something comes up, and mutation comes up on screen. Or
genetic alteration.
Genetic.
But that's a joke later on when they're trying to explain what's happening to Miss Martin, and she says generic alteration. Right. He's like, genetic alteration.
Yeah. No, but like on the screen with the DNA, it's there's that whole like 80s 90s thing where the computer knows everything.
Yeah.
And then we cut to Stern's face and Krenner's face, like looking at it. And from their reaction, we know that it's bad. But otherwise, the computer screen tells us absolutely nothing.
We were talking about that in relation to the Cassandra Crossing in the sense that the midsection of the movie is made up of people waiting around to get sick and people doing esoteric scientific research that we need to have explained to us. I think there are a couple of really good and I think kind of surprising scenes in the film. I really liked Six Pack's resurrection scene, where Ernie Hudson comes in and he's just talking to him. We know that Six Pack is dead at that point. So when Ernie, what's Ernie Hudson's character's name?
Jones
comes in and Jones doesn't know that he just thinks that he's sick because they haven't told them what's happening yet.
And there's a blanket over him, right?
Yeah, there's a blanket over him. We know that he's dead, but then he moves, and that's surprising to us, but not to Jones, because Jones expects him to move.
Yeah,
I thought that was really, really good.
And the movement's still human enough to be plausible to Jones. Yeah.
I also thought the suicide scene when Bowman comes in and sees Six Pack in the middle of his transformation, where he has his forearm has opened up into this weird kind of orifice, and the next time we see her, she's cut her wrists in the shower because she sees that that's what's going to happen to her. I thought that was quite good.
Do you think so? Coming to the creature itself. Many episodes ago, we covered Deep Rising, and your one qualm with that film, a film which you otherwise really like, I think, is that the creature is never quite established as to what kind of creature it is. It's kind of intricate in some scenes, but then massive, mother monster, queen bee at the end. My presumption is that you like this creature a little more. You think it's better designed, etc., etc.
No, I actually feel pretty much the same about this one as I do about Deep Rising. I find it. I think this film is weakest in its third act. I like all the setup. I like the character interactions and everything up to kind of the point where you're kind of expecting all of the action beats to kick in.
Yeah,
and you're expecting for the creature to become more. You're expecting to see more of the creature, effectively, as the film goes on. And I had, like I said, I had forgotten most of the details of this film. I'd forgotten most of the climax, and it's a pretty by the numbers kind of climax for this kind of film, and it plays out with. No, I don't really think there are any standout moments that stick in memory. And there continues to be, I think, up to a too late point, this frustrating cutting around the creature, a lot of quick cutting, where we're only getting little glimpses, well past the point where another film would have shown you the creature, and the fact that you're not shown the creature, and the fact that there's a real like in Deep Rising. In Deep Rising, it's a little bit different, because in Deep Rising, it's just literally just a question of the anatomy of the creature. Not to spend another 15 minutes on this, but but here it's not as simple as that, because this is some sort of pathogen that's transforming organisms and combining them and creating new things. And we never get sort of a sense of what's actually going on. There's a lack of clarity in the creature concept. And it results in a feeling of the creature being a kind of a random assemblage of monster beats. Here's some tentacles, and here's some teeth, and here's some weird biomorphic stuff. And, it's fine, but I don't really think it's any better than that.
Yeah, I think my most lasting memory of the creature as a single sort of visible entity is when I think Williams, played by Amanda Pays, is trying to get from one meshed floor to another because it's fallen as they're getting to the escape pods, and we see the creature as some sort of humanoid in a humanoid form behind her very briefly, sort of slowly making its way towards her in a very sort of Creature from the Black Lagoon fashion.
Yeah.
That's the most sort of obvious point for me, but I much prefer it when it's got its tentacles and they're getting cut off by like doors and lowering platforms that then cut the tentacles off, and then the tentacles sort of transform later on. Yeah, I much prefer that kind of stuff than, you know, Shape of Water sort of fishman sort of thing.
One thing that kind of annoyed me, and I don't know, like whenever I just have a thing about this, like if you establish your story as taking place, like compare this to The Thing or Alien, right? In The Thing, you're set at this Arctic station was the word I was looking for. Research station. That's what I'm. Okay, so
the research hub, the Arctic research hub.
The hub.
Yeah.
So you're set at this Antarctic research station.
Yeah.
We never leave there. Like physically, we're never transplanted from there back to, you know, somewhere in the US. You know, it's, and in Alien, we go with the astronauts onto the planet. You know, but we don't. Once we're on the ship with them, we're not cutting away back to somebody at the company. Here we do that. Now I don't mind the fact that they talk to her, but we there are 2 points where the hermetic seal of the film is punctured with kind of pointless shots of, like, because we already don't trust her. You know, we don't need
That's
an
what
additional.
I meant. Like, there's that shot of her with, I think after they've you know, hung up with the conversation and then cut to her.
That's what I mean.
And just like make a point of her like eyes staring into the middle distance.
Yeah, like we don't like. She's not to be trusted, but I mean, that's obvious from the second we see her, and it's obvious before we see her. Like, we know the type of film that we're watching. We know that the company is not trustworthy. But I always, whenever they do that, you know, another film that does that is Spielberg's Duel, which I think is a really weird thing. Where you know, the whole idea is this kind of you should always be with him. You know, it should be a very sort of perspectivized kind of story. And there's a scene where he calls his wife and kids, and there's no reason at all for us to see the wife and kids. He's just on the phone. He's talking to his wife. I can't remember if we can hear her voice over the phone. Or I think we can. And then it cuts to, he goes, "Oh, you know, bye." And then she's like, "Bye." And it cuts to them at home in the living room. Like they had to cast the wife. They had to cast like 3 kids. They had to like decorate the sets all for this shot that does nothing but disrupt the sort of sense of location and.
Well, do you feel the same way about that with regard to Of Unknown Origin? I mean, you know, Shannon Tweed plays Peter Weller's wife, and I mean, we see them before they leave the house, I suppose.
But we don't cut from him in the house to them on holiday.
Yeah, we do.
Do we?
Yeah, they're in the swimming pool and everything else.
Oh yeah, I suppose. But no, I don't really feel the same way about that, because with that film, it doesn't have the same sort of sense of isolation and you know, that's not the feeling that they're going for. I don't know, if it's just if I get a sense that there's a hermetic seal around the film, it always bugs me a little bit if it's punctured for no good reason.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And coming back to the idea of returning to Earth as they do at the very end of this film, the very final gag is Peter Weller actually punching Meg Foster in the face.
That's so funny.
But the penultimate gag, if you like, I mean, talk about having a bad day or a bad 3 days. Once they get to the surface of the ocean and they're waiting for the helicopter to pick them up, there's fucking sharks.
That's so funny. I don't know whether I was remembering the film in some weird way, but once they got to the surface, the thought crossed my mind: wouldn't it be hilarious if sharks showed up? and then it's like sharks. So funny, and his play on the Chief Brody "Smile, you son of a bitch" line from Jaws is "Say ah, motherfucker," as he throws the bomb into his mouth.
I think my single favorite image of the film is the creature's hand, or like, is it like the teeth stretching out from the palm of is it Krenna's hand?
I can't remember.
But anyway, some crew member's hand who's already been infected, and there's like a close up of the palm with like teeth come like a mouth on it. That's my single favorite image of the film. It's a 7 out of 10 for me.
It's a 7 for me as well.
Yeah. Okay, good. On the same page. Should we move on?
Yeah, okay. So finally, I was able to dig up some information about a project that Cosmatos was attached to around 1990-91. And it was one of 2 competing Christopher Columbus biopics that were targeting 1992 release dates to mark the 500th anniversary of Columbus's first voyage to the New World. The other one being Ridley Scott's 1492 Conquest of Paradise, which starred Gerard Depardieu in the lead. The one that Cosmatos was attached to was called Christopher Columbus: The Discovery. And it was to star Timothy Dalton. When Cosmatos left the project, Dalton also left the project. John Glenn, oddly Dalton's director on his 2 James Bond films, came in, took over as director, and Christopher Reeve took over in the lead. And the movie was... apparently the 2 Columbus films premiered almost at exactly the same time.
Right.
But Scott's film was much more successful, much more high profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, but that's it. And the next film that Cosmatos directed was 1993's Tombstone.
You back that queen again, you son of a bitch. I'll blow you right up that Wildcat's ass. Do you hear me? Huh? Something on your mind?
Just want to let you know you're sitting in my chair.
Is that a fact?
Yeah, it's a fact.
Well, for a man that don't go heeled, you run your mouth kind of reckless, don't you?
No need to go heel to get the bulge on a tub like you.
Is that a fact?
That's a fact.
Well, I'm real scared.
Damn right you're scared. I can see that in your eyes.
All right,
Now, go ahead. Go ahead, skin it. Skin that smoke wagon and see what happens.
Listen, mister, I'm getting awful tired of your...
I'm getting tired of your gas. Now jerk that pistol and go to work. I said throw down, boy. Oh! You gonna do something or just stand there and bleed?
Okay, so Tombstone, produced by James Jacks, Sean Daniel, and Bob Misiorowski, and written by Kevin Jarre, or Jarre, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
I said Jar earlier, so we'll stick with Jar.
Okay, we'll go with Jarre. Was produced by Hollywood Pictures, the Disney subsidiary that used to produce R-rated films, and distributed by Buena Vista Pictures. There's probably an audible banging on my end here, but that's work going on next door. So apologies for that.
It's not our your enemies banging on the bunker door. Finally take you away.
It was released Christmas Eve 1993. Budget 25 million, box office 56 million. And was kind of overshadowed. Like, this would have been released, what, like... It would have been the same year that Unforgiven won Best Picture.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it kind of went under the radar a little bit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was supposed to be Kevin Jarre's first job as a director, but he was fired about a month into shooting, and George Cosmatos was brought on board with very little prep time. And it came out later that, well, it came from Kurt Russell later that Kurt Russell had actually directed the film, and that Cosmatos had just been there to sort of oversee things. And Val Kilmer has sort of partly corroborated that and said, well, it was kind of like a collaborative effort between Russell and Cosmatos. I'm always a little bit skeptical of those kinds of stories. Because you always get tangled up in the semantics of what it actually means to direct a film. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the whole thing about like Steven Spielberg and Tobe Hooper and Poltergeist.
Yeah.
And the question of like, well, you know, Steven Spielberg was on set and he was like telling the actors what to do, and it's like, well, that's directing.
Yeah.
You know, and he was like he was working with the cinematographer to set up the shots, and it's like, well, that's directing.
Yeah.
And then the idea of like, well, Tobe Hooper was not involved in post-production at all. It's like, well, the director oversees post-production as well, but like that wasn't always true. The director often didn't oversee post-production, and the producer was the one who oversaw pre and post-production, and that would be a creatively involved producer, which, you know, would be the case of like, you know, George Lucas in the Star Wars movies. But
Sure.
I don't know. It's always a little bit. You always get tangled up in like, you know, what it actually means, like what, because ostensibly a director is the overarching sort of creative voice from the beginning to the end of all three stages of production. But there's a more narrow kind of understanding of directing as being setting up shots and directing actors.
Sure.
I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, so the plot of this one. Former Arizona lawman Wyatt Earp, played by Kurt Russell, moves with his two brothers Virgil and Morgan, played respectively by Sam Elliott and Bill Paxton, and their wives, to the small but growing mining town of Tombstone to set themselves up in business. Once there, the Earps run afoul of the cowboy gang, led by Curly Bill Brocious and Johnny Ringo, played by Powers Booth and Michael Biehn, who, through their reputation for violence and ruthlessness, have run roughshod over the meagre law enforcement of the small town. Initially reluctant to get involved in the town's problems, wanting to focus on their entrepreneurial aspirations, Wyatt and his brothers, accompanied by their friend, alcoholic and tubercular gunslinger Doc Holliday, played by Val Kilmer, gradually get drawn into further and more violent confrontations with the cowboys, including a famous shootout at the OK Corral. I had seen the film before. You hadn't, did you?
I hadn't, no. I'd known of it, and I remember it being on television to much acclaim when I was younger. You mentioned Unforgiven, and the idea that it might have gone under the radar. It was critically well received at the time, I believe. It feels like a much more old-fashioned gunslinging film in relation to Unforgiven, and I don't know enough about, you know, the critical discourse at the time, or how Unforgiven like changed things in terms of the Western genre or revised things. So I wouldn't like to commit to anything too concrete in that comparison, but this feels like a almost like a film that's perpetuating rather than exploring or interrogating urban legends surrounding what is a very, very infamous gunfight in American history. If you know what I mean. It feels more like a film to enjoy rather than be kind of, although there are horrifying things in it, it's a film to enjoy rather than be kind of taken aback by, if you know what I mean. I think it's the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of its sensibility from something like Unforgiven.
Yeah, I mean, Unforgiven is kind of heavy and downbeat.
Yeah.
Whereas this is much more upbeat and much more, it's just like fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's an inherent tendency to reinforce a cathartic, satisfying narrative in the Western, I think. It is, after all, inherent to American historiographies, and has played a large part in the consolidation of the American image, I think. And this film doesn't do anything particularly radical to challenge that, I think. Although it is a film that I very much enjoyed. You mentioned fun there. And I also mentioned the fact that horrifying things do happen, like, you know, the opening scene in which we're introduced to the antagonists of the film. They basically, you know, raid a church, a wedding party, and kill everyone and rape the bride. And that in that opening scene, I mean, not to open with a structural weakness of the film, but in that opening scene, it does sort of hint at certain tensions within the group of antagonists that come into play much, much later in the film, at a point at which we've totally forgotten the fact that Michael Rooker is involved in Curly Bill's gang. Michael Rooker, who we've covered on the John Singleton episode in relation to Rosewood. He's also come up in the Avengers Infinity War episode. I think it's fair to say we're big fans of his. Maybe we should do a Journeyman episode dedicated to actors or an actor and do Michael Rooker. But anyway, Michael Rooker shows up later on the side of Wyatt Earp and everyone else.
So the escalating series of encounters reaches the point where the cowboy gang breaks into I'm not sure which house. I think is it Virgil's house where all the Earp brothers' wives are spending the evening together, and just like kicks the door in and like unloads his shotgun into the room, seemingly not with much intention of killing them. It's just like to terrify them, and that is from the point of view of Michael Rooker and his two colleagues completely unacceptable and beyond the pale, and not what he signed up for when he joined the cowboy gang. And it's just it's a little bit, it reminded me a little bit of The Wire when is it Marlowe's gang? Oh no, it's not, sorry, it's when Stringer Bell and it's when Stringer Bell is trying to kill Omar and he orders a hit on him on Sunday at the church. And Avon is like appalled, like that's just not, you don't do that. That kind of thing reminded me of that.
Right, I don't want to.
But I agree with you. I agree with you that this was originally an epic. Kevin Jarre's script was like, it had there was a sprawling epic all about the period and about the gangs and like it wasn't just about the Earp family, the way that it happens to be. So like when Russell. When Jar was fired, Russell came on and whittled the script down just to focus on the Earp family, and then Cosmatos further focused the story on the relationship between Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. And you can see, and like, so a lot of the subplots were deleted. So like a lot of the insight that we would have got into the internal sort of dynamic of the cowboy gang, that's gone. And there's a sequence at the end where I had forgotten actually how brutal it is, where Wyatt has basically just had enough and he's not going to like play any games anymore, and he just is going around murdering people. He's not like apprehending people or whatever. He's just like going around murdering unarmed people. And it sort of feels like we're supposed to know who they are. When they're being killed, but it's just like a series of guys with the red sashes that represent their membership of the cowboy gang. Like there's a guy that he kills while he's like smoking opium or something like that. He goes to put the opium pipe in his mouth, and it turns out that it's Wyatt's gun, and he just shoots him in the face. But
you're with me when I say that Rooker's sort of twist means very little, or it means a lot less than it should.
Absolutely, It feels like leftovers from a deleted storyline.
And likewise, by the end of the film, is it meant to be finally about friendship? Because there's a final scene between Doc and Wyatt that, for me, doesn't quite feel earned emotionally. I mean, it's established that Doc and Wyatt have a friendship that pre-exists the events of the film, and they're surprised to see Doc in the town of Tombstone when they arrive. However, and obviously, like, great performance by Val Kilmer. Wasn't even aware that he was in this film before I started watching it, actually. And then, that's shame on me because it is a great performance. Chemistry's hinted at. I can't say they're not there. But then, like, at the end of the film, when he's dying, when he's on his deathbed, Doc, and Wyatt goes to visit him, that scene has a charge to it, by which I was presuming, okay, we're meant at this point to feel like this is the culmination of a friendship that has been the driving force of the events of this film, that's persisted despite and because of, the action that we've seen. I didn't get that.
No, I agree. And that's kind of what I was suggesting when I said that you started off with a sprawling, like panoramic historical epic.
Yeah.
That was pared down to be a sort of a more contained Western action film.
Yeah.
Focusing on the Earp family.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way it plays out. Like, for the first 2/3 of the film or so, it plays out as primarily being about the relationship between the three Earp brothers.
Yeah.
And with Doc as a supporting character.
Mm.
And then suddenly Doc is pushed to the foreground, and his relationship with Wyatt is pushed to the foreground. But I was also thinking of what we were talking about when we talked about Jason and the Argonauts, and we were talking about our familiarity with the myths that the story is based on, or that the film is based on.
Yeah.
And the way in which there's a sort of, there's no canon in the contemporary sense of that word, but there is a sense of like, this is the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece.
Mm.
But there's a further adventure before that, and like Hercules shows up in this story, and if you want to read the Hercules stories, there's also myths about Hercules, and Medea shows up, but there's a story about what happened after Medea killed Jason, and so on. It kind of reminded me of that. Like, the film at points feels like it would benefit from knowledge of the actual history, where, like, on the viewer's part, where if you actually knew about the history between Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp in reality, that it would mean more to you, and that it's almost like gesturing at that, more so than suggesting that has been established and developed within the film, that it's kind of gesturing to something outside the film.
Well, I like what Cosmatos apparently said with regard to the OK Corral, which in cinematic traditions has been the culmination point of the narrative. Here it happens, and then there's like another, I don't know how long it is, but there's a large chunk of plot narrative to follow, and I like that. The actual fallout of this infamous,
halfway through, isn't it?
Yeah, like borderline legend incident. And I agree. So I get all that, but it also feels like that final scene is perfunctory rather than emotional for me. The Wyatt visiting Doc in hospital. However, as I said, I don't want to persist with weaknesses and criticisms of the film, because for large chunks of it,
Can I just offer one more though?
Yeah, sorry.
In relation to that scene, that what Doc implores Wyatt to do in that scene is to go and pursue the singer who had shown up in town, a singer and a magician played by Billy Zane, show up in the town to perform, and Wyatt Earp becomes kind of like fascinated and fixated by this singer,
played by Donna Delaney,
right, and to the detriment of his relationship with his wife, who's kind of in the process of descending into is it opium?
Yeah, opium addiction. Yeah,
she's an opium addiction. Okay, that is set up, thinly developed, and then she just leaves town.
Yeah.
And then we spend the rest of the film focusing on the conflict with the cowboys, and then at the very end of the film, he returns to her, and they get married.
Yeah.
But it's again feels like, the leftovers of something that was deleted.
It feels like a rushed wrap up that should have been discarded rather than expanded, rather than included. If it wasn't going to be expanded upon, I would love to have seen this film execute Jaws' script. In the way that you've described it as it originally was. Because, as I said, for large chunks of it, it is involving, it's absorbing, it has a sweep to it. I love the direction, whether or not it's Cosmatos or Russell responsible for it. But, like that, chest height widescreen of, characters descending from carriages and from horses. And, the camera's just positioned ever so slightly beneath shoulder height. So you get this sense of overbearing masculinities within a very, very well established social milieu. Wonderful use of widescreen. Like 8 people side by side in some of the compositions. Really, really amazing. Sorry, what were you going to say?
What is your favorite scene in the film?
So there's 3 standoffs, right, which I think are extremely well done. The first of which. There's more than 3 standoffs, but the first 3, I'll break them down. So there's the first one where Earp first enters the Oriental, the bar that he then.
This is my favorite. This is my favorite scene.
This is the first
one. The one we heard in the clip, but describe it anyway.
Yeah, so there's like a patron, a regular, let's say, at the gambling table in the bar who's like, mouthing off and making a bit of a ruckus.
Played by Billy Bob Thornton.
Played by Billy Bob Thornton as Johnny Tyler. And Russell, Earp, sorry. Yeah.
Wyatt.
Director star Russell, Kurt Russell. So he goes over and, like half of a fight is psychological anyway. And he just, runs the guy down without even having to raise his fists, which is really great. Then there's a second
Although
scene...
he does start slapping him around, which is really funny.
There's a second scene in the Oriental after this one where Ringo and Doc enter. Ringo. It's Ringo and Curly Bill. Enter, and there's a standoff between sort of Ringo and Doc Holliday, and Ringo with the reputation for being the fastest gun in the land, but then Doc Holliday is also known for his speed, and he just the withering response that Doc, who's obviously intoxicated, gives Ringo. So Ringo's doing all this like gunslinging show-off thing, and everyone's like applauding, and then Doc just responds by doing exactly the same, but with his cup of alcohol, as if it's a gun, which I really, really loved. I think I prefer that one to the first one, and then there's a third one, which is just outside where after Curly Bill kills Fred White, the sheriff, and Earp kind of goes out, apprehends Curly Bill, and is confronted by the rest of the cowboys, and then the other Earps come, and then Doc's there, and it's all a bit tense. There's an actual like standoff. I think those three scenes are the standout scenes before any of the events leading to OK Corral. I think they're highly, highly enjoyable.
That is a great scene where the confrontation is with Ike, the guy who has already had a confrontation with Doc in the Oriental, but Wyatt puts a gun to his forehead and says, you die first, Ike. And somebody else says, he's bluffing. And Ike's like, no, he's not. He's not.
Yeah, played by Stephen Lang in a very, very different role to what we'll talk about in the next segment. But
yes. Oh wow, I didn't recognize him.
Yeah, he is kind of unrecognizably animated.
I had trouble even recognizing him in Shadow Conspiracy. I even had trouble recognizing him because I know Stephen Lang primarily from Don't Breathe, which is just 2 years ago, so he's way younger in these films.
Right, yeah, sure.
And obviously Avatar as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, but those scenes are great.
I was gonna say, this film has a sort of clean, manufactured, even studio feel to it that I might otherwise not respond to positively. But there's like a crispness. I mean, this is also to compound that. As I was watching, I'm thinking at times this is almost suspiciously beautiful to look at in a way that none of Cosmatos' other films are. I mean, like Cobra, we mentioned like Cobra has a really nice steely palette to it. This, though, I mean, some of the vistas in this and the sweeping feel to it, I find myself wanting, like, instinctively to resist it because I'm like, this film shouldn't be as beautiful as it is in some ways. Do you know what I mean?
Why shouldn't it be beautiful?
I don't know. That's what I mean. It's just like an instinctive thing that kicks into me. It's like I shouldn't be caught up in this.
But westerns are often beautiful.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Like John Ford's westerns are famous.
Maybe it's the wall-to-wall score that accompanies the action as well. That actually we haven't mentioned in relation to Cosmatos' filmography as a whole. But he's a director that utilizes music often, let's say, to put it lightly and to put it diplomatically, and adds, as I say, to the studio feel of this film. But I think the production design, everything, the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous.
It's a great looking film.
Watching it on VLC, I found myself pressing Shift and S to screen grab almost every image.
Can I say one thing about that scene that we were just talking about outside the Oriental, where the sheriff
Fred White.
Fred White, the Marshal Fred
Yeah.
White. Yeah, sorry, not Johnny Bean, the sheriff. So when Marshal Fred White is killed by Curly Bill,
Yeah.
It happened. The way that it happens is Curly Bill is drunk and he's just like out in the street shooting at nothing in particular. And the marshal comes out and demands that Bill hand over his guns, and Bill says, "Oh, I think he says I'm only funning," and he hands over the guns, handle first.
Yeah.
But the way that he hands them, the gun discharges and shoots the marshal.
Yeah.
And I thought, and then when the marshal is shot, Bill says, "Marshal," and like runs over, and it's like it's an accident.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then it doesn't play out like that. But in reality, it was an accident, and the reason that he wasn't charged was that before the marshal died, he said to other people it was an accident.
Right. Yeah.
So I wonder, did that play out in the script? Because I don't see the point in dramatizing it as an accident if you're in the moment, if you're not going to follow through on the implications of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's
he may as well just shoot him.
To come at it from to come at it from another angle. The Earps are painted at moments, at points. I mean, you've already mentioned that sequence, the montage towards the end, where he's just like killing indiscriminately. They're painted potentially as bad or in as bad a light as the cowboys are. But there's then moments where you're right. I think like where they've kind of skirted over some issues in order to reposition the film's moral compass. And I think it's ultimately to the film's detriment. I don't think it's a fatal flaw. I mean, it's still highly enjoyable despite these issues. But yeah, I think and Booth gives such a great performance as the guy who's the villain, but also like, you know, the cowboys have and I think also Michael Biehn's great as well as Johnny Ringo. You know, they're kind of pathetic and fallible in the same way that the Earps ultimately are in a way. But you know, that doesn't really play out. I agree.
Yeah, I think in a way you could say the film sort of falls between two poles, where, you know, it could have been this sweeping panoramic historical epic, fully articulating all of its storylines and relationships and character arcs, or on the other hand, it could have been even more pared down.
Yeah,
and they could have jettisoned even more of the material that sits in here in a kind of vestigial form.
Yeah, and
focused, like, just kept the focus on this conflict and made the kind of, like, you know, rootin' tootin' gunslinging, you know, fun Western action adventure film that they appeared to have settled on and decided to make.
Yeah.
But maybe it's too long. Maybe there's a little bit of residual baggage.
I mean, it's
that should have been trimmed further. I know that it was a troubled production and they didn't have a lot of time.
Yeah,
there was a lot. It was one of those productions where they were doing the day's shooting and then they were storyboarding for the next day that night.
Yeah,
it's that kind of thing.
I mean, it's unbelievable that, you know, the money involved in these kinds of productions, how these things even happen.
Yeah,
you know, it's
like the way we prepare for the Habitus.
Yeah, well, we storyboard the Habitus. No, you're right. I mean, it's either way too long or way too short, and it reminds me a little bit of what Mike D'Angelo says of Heat, which is, you know, a top 5 film for me. But you know, he says, and it
doesn't quite make your 4 favorites.
It does. It's in my
is it in there?
4, yeah. But my Letterboxd, I don't agree with having a top 4. You know, that Letterboxd. It's cruel that Letterboxd doesn't have a top 5 slot, so I have to keep rotating them. So I know that recently you noticed that The French Connection had been ditched from my top 4 with a shock face. French Connection remains my number 1 film, but for the purposes of a democratic top 4 on Letterboxd, I have to keep rotating them. Just to let everyone know. But no, what he says about Heat is that it either could be a long running series or, you know, an epic that's actually longer than 3 hours, and really flesh out some of its subplots and relationships, or it could be really, really pared down to just the De Niro Pacino thing. So I think this film kind of suffers from the same things, albeit its flaws are imposed rather than the outcome of actual choices. or directorial choices.
I have one last thing to say, and it also relates to Michael Rooker. What is going on? Maybe it's another consequence of the script changes, but what is going on when he goes, after he's defected from the Cowboys, and he just goes and meets with them in this isolated location? What does he think is going to happen after he's been killing their gang members?
Yeah, perhaps there was a scene that explained that, but it comes as no surprise.
It feels like it feels like he should know that he's going to his death, for sure.
You mentioned Stephen Lang is unrecognisable. Thomas Hayden Church, for me, as his brother, Billy Clanton, is unrecognisably young here. Because I only know, Thomas Hayden Church from, Sideways. That was my first encounter with him. And they're
Sideways and Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, exactly. And, he shows up in this, and I'm like, oh, who's that again? I feel like I should know that face. And then, yeah. Anyway, it's a 7 out of 10 for me.
It's a 7 out of 10 for me as well. I think there are parts of it that are fantastic, and other parts of it that feel a bit kind of long-winded or a little bit kind of under-articulated. And,
chunks of it.
But yes, it's a film that I do like.
Chunks of it are an 8, and it would be an overall 8 if there was more of Donna Delaney. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so I couldn't find anything between Tombstone and his final film either, so let's move straight on to 1997's Shadow Conspiracy.
What just happened?
What were your sources?
Bobby, what just happened?
Was it Pachenko?
I'm not telling you my sources until you tell me what just happened.
Pachenko is dead. The same guy that just tried to kill us shot him in the head. He died in my fucking arms last night.
Jesus.
Pachenko tried to tell me some wild story about a traitor in the government. He started to say something about Shadow. You gotta talk to me, Amanda.
Yeah, it was Pachenko and his study group. They have this database that correlates everything that our public officials do. If there's any evidence of bribery or misuse of government funds or interagency misconduct, stuff like that, then this program will find it.
And they call it Shadow?
I don't know.
Okay, so tell me, what is Shadow Conspiracy about?
Right, so produced by Andrew G. Viner, Buzz Feitshans, and Terry Collis for Synergy Pictures, and again, Hollywood Pictures. Written by A.D. Hassack and Rick Gibbs. That's not a reflection of your opinion of the film, I hope. It centers on Bobby Bishop, played by Charlie Sheen, a special aide to the US president, played by Sam Waterston, whose old professor has uncovered a conspiracy within the US government to overthrow the president prior to a re-election campaign. Bobby's helped in his cause by old flame and journalist Amanda Givens, played by Linda Hamilton. And I suppose all you need to know about the conspiracy itself is that among the president's staff is a vice president played by Ben Gazzara, and get this, a chief of staff played by Donald Sutherland. Now, Shadow Conspiracy was made for $45 million, and upon its release on the final day of January in 1997, it made $2 million. And I find it difficult to say that without almost bursting into laughter.
Is that its first day gross or its first weekend gross?
No. That's its box office takings
altogether.
Yes,
its domestic box office is $2 million.
It has a 0. It has a 0% score on Rotten Tomatoes, if that means anything as well. I don't know how frequently that happens on Rotten Tomatoes as somebody who never uses it.
for films that are Rotten Tomatoes was launched in I think 98, so for films prior to that they haven't sourced that many.
So they never
reviews.
So they don't re-aggregate and stuff because I'm presuming critics have written about Shadow Conspiracy since then that might
I guess I don't know. I don't know if they do that. I'm not sure.
But anyway, at any rate, do you think let's open it up straight away. Do you think it deserves such a harsh, cruel fate?
I'm really surprised that it only made $2 million. that's pretty poor. because the thing that struck me about this was the first thing. First of all, let me say that we'll get to ranking Cosmatos' films when we finish this segment, but the first thing that occurred to me here watching this one was, man, remember when Charlie Sheen was an actual leading man? I think it was a real period in the 90s when he was in films like this and, you know, The Arrival and Terminal Velocity and like all these like, you know, like...
None of which I've seen, by the way.
Right. I think Charlie Sheen is an absolutely terrible actor.
Really?
I think the films that I know him best from are the Hot Shots movies.
Yeah, that's the only films I think I've seen him in.
But and shortly after this, he basically transitioned into being like a sitcom actor on like 2.5 Men and the other sitcoms that he's done.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I've obviously seen because it's been running for like 15 years. But even though he constantly seems to have one eyebrow raised, it's like the register in which his performance is given is just continued from Hot Shots. It's like he's in a different film. And almost all of his lines are delivered in the same tone and convey almost no emotion at all. So like whether he's supposed to be expressing fear or surprise or concern or urgency or panic, it's all just the same. It's an incredibly flatline performance.
Yeah.
Also, this was the same year as Dante's Peak, so this and Dante's Peak are kind of the last major films that Linda Hamilton was the lead in as well. Before she transitioned into a lot of her stuff started going straight to video. And she did like telefilms and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, with a fucking box office gross of 2 million, though, I mean, what can you do? Jesus Christ!
Didn't do anybody any favors. It's also Cosmatos' last one.
Yeah.
This is the career killer.
Absolutely brutal. I mean, like,
but what you mentioned there about all you need to know is that Ben Gazzara and Donald Sutherland are in it. One of the top rated reviews on Letterboxd is I think the user's name is Dirk H. It just says, "Look at that cast. And guess who the bad guy is? This film takes 100 minutes to get there." And like literally, the second Donald Sutherland is introduced, I was like, "He's the baddie," you know.
It's weird, right? Because you know, Sutherland is, I mean, Gazzara as well is absolutely great, but Sutherland, before you even begin to watch this film, you look at the cast, and Sutherland's like operating across his career and in terms of natural talent on another level to the rest of the cast here, I think, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
weirdly, it wasn't Charlie Sheen who I thought was miscast. It was Donald Sutherland, because he's distractingly talented, right, in a film like this, and yet seems to have cottoned on to the fact before everyone else did that he was in a fucking turkey. And is giving a kind of half-committed performance, I think, in this. I think he's coasting along in a role that he can do with his blindfolded and with his hands tied behind his back.
He's also... the dialogue in the film is usually pretty bad, except for his dialogue, to the extent that it almost seems like he wrote it himself or he improvised it or something. Because the other person who's... Well... I mean, I think Charlie Sheen is terrible, and because he's the leading man, you know, that hurts the film more than anything else.
Yeah.
But also Nicholas Turturro as
Grasso,
Mr. Grasso. Like every one of these movies needs some sort of like tech genius.
Yeah.
He's the worst I've ever seen. He's just unbelievably bad. It's such a weird bit of casting.
Yeah.
Absolutely bizarre. But there's an interaction between him and Donald Sutherland where I can't remember, what is the metaphor that he uses? A death train, causing, death at every station or something like that. And
maybe he was referring
Donald
to
Sutherland says,
crossing.
Donald Sutherland says, keep your brilliant metaphors to yourself. And, he also uses the word negatory. He's like, a negatory is not a word.
Yeah.
And he also, when he first shows up, he says something about, doesn't he remind you of Jimmy Cagney? It's almost like Donald Sutherland is commenting on the bizarre casting of this actor in this role. When, like, you know, like the following year we had Enemy of the State, where like that character is played by Seth Green. It's like that's the kind of character that's the kind of actor you put in that role.
Yeah,
Nicholas Turturro is a strange choice. But yeah, I know I agree that Donald Sutherland is good. He's always good in these types of roles. But like, I presume you also just twigged immediately that he was the bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, like, so in the very few notes,
once they establish that he's friends with Charlie Sheen, that's it. That's enough. You know what's coming.
But
it can go nowhere else.
But what I'm saying about Sutherland is that on paper, he's by far and away the best actor in this. But I don't think his performance is particularly better than anybody else's. As I said, it's almost as if he cottoned on to the fact that this isn't a very good film and really couldn't be bothered with it. Because I think he gives us nothing in terms of is he or isn't he the villain? Is he or isn't he going to be the villain? Like he's like visibly suspicious even before like the script hints that he's the villain. He's like just the way like it's almost as if he's a fucking he took it upon himself to be a walking spoiler through his own film. Like I'm gonna be the scene where he falls asleep.
There's even a scene where he falls asleep in the middle of the. It's like he's taking the piss out of the movie.
Yeah, it is. It completely is.
Honestly. But that's why it's the best thing in it.
And
though.
By all accounts, I think that Donald Sutherland is very capable of that kind of reflexive, conscious performance. I think he could, if he wanted to, very much torpedo a production in that sense, on screen and otherwise. Yeah. Not to risk libel or anything like that. But
like there's a scene where the scene that I'm referring to, Charlie Sheen and Linda Hamilton have broken into the wherever it is, and they've hacked into, or no, they haven't hacked into, but they've used Donald Sutherland's character's password to get into his private database to get whatever the information is, and Nicholas Turturro's character is monitoring all the computer systems in the building, and he sees that Donald Sutherland's character has logged in, and he turns around and Donald Sutherland is like asleep on the table, and he's like, "Did you log into the database?" He wakes him up. He's like, "Well, I'm here with you. Obviously, I didn't log in." It's like he's become so bored by the film that he's just checked out.
Yeah, Sutherland had kind of a formative. He was a formative presence in my early cinephile days because he plays Warden Drumgoole, who I'm sure I've mentioned before in Lock Up. He's Sylvester Stallone's antagonist in that film. Another great John Flynn film. I'm sure I've mentioned it before. We should do a John Flynn episode.
You have mentioned John Flynn, before.
Lock Up was my first favourite film, I think. Yeah. Before I upgraded to the likes of The Samurai and everything when I went through my pretentious phase. But coming back to Sutherland, and that scene you've just mentioned when they hack into his computer, doesn't his computer on screen also say like he ordered the killing of somebody with extreme prejudice? Like it's the first fucking shadow conspiracy ever.
The funniest, or I don't know if it's like, who knows? Let's not speculate about the intentions, but the scene where they're trying to locate Linda Hamilton's car, and it's like top priority. We need to find this car.
Yeah,
and he orders Nicholas Turturro to do whatever he needs. We need to get some satellite images, and he says, satellite images to find a car? You know what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to, reroute satellites that are watching Cuba, maybe take some from the Middle East. And where is she? In her apartment. Like, they could have just had someone watching her apartment. Like, why don't they have someone watching her apartment? It's like they take satellites from all over the world trying to find this car. It's like, oh, she's in the most obvious place she could possibly be. You mentioned Stephen Lang. Okay, so like I didn't like this film. I found it kind of, it's a very boilerplate political conspiracy thriller with a terrible lead. So for me, like the plots in these movies are never interesting. So that's not what you're here for. You're here for, much like in a Hitchcock film, something like like Saboteur or something like that, where you don't really care about the or like North by Northwest or something like that. It's not about the plot really. The plot is just a mechanism for moving from one sequence to the next, and hopefully the character that you're moving with is engaging and charismatic, and hopefully the sequences that you're moving to and from are exciting, suspenseful, action-packed, thrilling, humorous, stylish. Very little of that here. There are the merits that the film does have. I think all include Stephen Lang's like almost Terminator-esque hitman.
Yeah, he's very T-1000 in this.
Yeah, he is. The chase, the foot chase through the like shopping center.
Yeah,
is it a shopping center? And he, that ends up with Charlie Sheen hanging outside the window on the window washer platform thing, and ends up in a very kind of fugitive style, being like kind of flushed down the. I don't know what's going on, to be honest with you, in terms of the architecture of that building or what, where they are or what's happening, but he ends up in. What is that supposed to be? The sewer or?
Yeah, I guess.
Whatever. That's probably the best scene in the movie. Would you say? That's the best sequence.
Yeah.
There's not much in the way of suspense sequences. Like when they break in and they're hacking into the thing, there's a little bit of.
There's the elevator sequence
where the guy is on a motorbike shaft. In the elevator.
No. Like where Linda Hamilton and Charlie Sheen are like outside of the actual elevator in the shaft and have to sort of negotiate their way around. Cosmatos does that. It has that old-fashioned 90s action feel where we see, like, so if there's any sort of impact or collision, Cosmatos edits it very fast, but we see this collision like 2 or 3 times from different angles, which I always find quite charming. Doesn't really happen that much nowadays. But like a kind of the action equivalent of like creative geography. Roger Ebert, who gave it 1 star, you've mentioned that sewer-like space that doesn't really, we're not really sure what it does. Ebert references a steam and sparks factory, which actually recalls the climax of Cobra. And he says, so named because all it apparently produces are steam and sparks. And it's true. It's like one of those kind of nondescript backdrops that so many of these kinds of films seem to take place in. But you're right, you mentioned like Hitchcock, and it's very much, I think, trying to operate in that vein. You've got not a wrong man thriller, but a certain somebody who is targeted by the very people who they're trying to expose, dragged back into a romantic thread with a former flame who was also of use to him as a journalist. And then, the practical difficulties of living on a day-to-day basis in that context, such as, like, the twin room in the hotel, etc., etc. But, like, we don't really feel any sort of romantic connection between Sheen and Hamilton, right? They have
no chemistry at all.
It's kind of dead.
But how could you have chemistry with Charlie Sheen, though?
I know, it's true. It's.
You're saying that you only know Charlie Sheen from Hot Shots, yeah?
Yeah. I like in cinematic terms, I can't remember anything that I've seen him in. He's in Platoon, right?
Oh, sure, Platoon and Wall Street. Yeah.
I haven't seen Wall Street.
I haven't seen Platoon in a long time, but I remember thinking he wasn't good in Wall Street either.
Yeah.
I like Emilio Estevez though. I was thinking about that. Like, I think Emilio Estevez like got all the charisma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
He's
like Charlie Sheen plays like a parody Martin Sheen, like a spoof of his father.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
But Lang disappears for the majority of the midsection or the late midsection of the film.
Yeah,
he's just gone.
Yeah,
and like when we get the scene in the subway, we have somebody else chasing. Who is that?
What?
The guy on the motorbike?
Yeah, the guy on the motorbike.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's not Lang.
No, it's not.
Jesus, I don't know. When did you watch this?
Lang.
How long ago?
A few hours ago.
Jesus. I mean, it's a little bit longer than that.
No, I can't. See, that's the thing. I don't think that it's definitely not Lang.
No.
The character that chases him on the motorbike and that gets into the elevator and comes down the elevator on his little his motorbike. Because at that time or shortly after that we get cutaways to what Lang is doing, and he's building this like what looks like a toy robot that like a remote controlled robot that can shoot bullets.
Roger Ebert also picks up on that, saying that he needs some sort of physics graduate to explain to him how a toy helicopter can withstand the backfire or whatever that the actual machine gun would cause. How is it not derailed?
The kickback,
yeah, the kickback. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, but that was a little bit disappointing, because even though that's also like one of the better scenes in the film when he tries to kill the president with a remote control helicopter, fitted with some sort of actual like not like a light firearm, like some sort of like machine gun. But like what he's using when he's building these things in his house is some kind of robot or something. I was really hoping that the present that he brings, it's like, what is going on? Is it meant to be the president's birthday and everybody's bringing in like boxes of
giant,
and they don't even inspect what's in the box. You know, they pat him down, but they let him bring in this big box. Anyway, I was hoping that when the box opened, it would be like a remote control like robot. That would have been better. I think it's just a very kind of boilerplate conspiracy thriller, which is not really a genre that I would be that into. You know, like it would have to be done in the Hitchcockian style, where the plot really doesn't matter and it's all about style and set pieces, and effectively mines the scenario for tension and thrills and suspense. Crucially has a charismatic lead, because you're with that character for the whole thing, and you really can't do any worse than Charlie Sheen in that respect.
You know, it's made me, possibly counterintuitively from your angle, but it's made me want to actually watch the film again immediately with that in mind. Because when I was watching it, I must admit, like, I wasn't enthralled by Sheen, but nor was I like thinking, God, he is such a fatally, uncharismatic presence in this film. But I agree, you know, not wowed by him. I suppose I would be naturally more drawn to this kind of film than you would be. It's very post Tom Clancy. It comes after the Harrison Ford and Alec Baldwin incarnations of Jack Ryan, Clancy's recurrent protagonist in Hunt for Red October, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger. And actually, Sheen kind of fits the Jack Ryan bill almost, as, you know, a kind of everyman who's a good man to have in a storm, not necessarily an action lead, but somebody who's quick thinking and able to kind of, you know, negotiate and navigate the many different bureaucratic obstacles, etc., of the government. But I agree. I mean, he's not great in the role. By the way, I always preferred Alec Baldwin in that role than Harrison Ford, because Harrison Ford was at that point was more of an action man.
I think Alec Baldwin and Harrison Ford, obviously they're in a different league altogether from Charlie Sheen in terms of their acting abilities, but they both, particularly Harrison Ford, can play an everyman. I don't think Charlie Sheen can play an everyman.
No.
I
but
think
if he can't play an everyman, what can he play?
Like when he can play a spoof character in a Hot Shots film, and he can play himself in long-running and terrible sitcoms. But the parts where the film develops some kind of pulse are the action set pieces, and those are the scenes in which, you know, Charlie Sheen, I'm presuming, is like at least partly replaced by a stuntman. You know, and he's not really acting.
Yeah.
You know, he's just like doing physical things.
Yeah.
But any of the scenes, like particularly the scenes near the beginning, because the film does pick up as it goes on relative to how it starts, because at the start, when you're just getting these scenes like where it's supposed to be like the kind of surrogate father-son relationship between Sutherland and Sheen, and then the kind of the non-existent like romantic tension between Hamilton and Sheen.
Yeah.
At the party where he's like, and he's even dressed in like he's in the suit, and it's like you're watching Hot Shots, but it's not funny.
That's what I was going to say. This film, in some ways, plays out almost like a parody of the genre it's purporting to contribute to.
Yeah.
However, it doesn't do it with any kind of reflexive nods to the audience or wink nudges. And I have to say, it's very
except arguably from Donald Sutherland.
Yeah, who
Maybe.
definitely wasn't directed to play the role in that way, though. I don't think. You know, honestly,
Yeah, no,
it's such a fucking
probably not.
torpedo job from him. And like even like, you know, there's comic potential there though in the impossibly cool, as we said, Terminator-like performance from Stephen Lang. But we're meant to take him, like his character, kind of like literally, and like we can't anymore, you know. And it might be a very post-97 perspective from which we're viewing the film, but you know, even at the time, it didn't catch on because it
made $2 million. Do you know what its worldwide gross is?
No, I don't know. That's domestic.
I can't imagine, you know, over 20 years ago that it would have been much better than that.
No.
Huge in China.
And yet,
do you know what I've seen was... Sorry.
And yet, I was just going to say, everything you've said, nothing you've said I disagree with, but I didn't mind the film, I have to say. I find it an enjoyable watch. And maybe it's that, just having... that, you know, that kind of thing where you just have to kind of roll with it, I think.
Sure. Have you seen Enemy of the State?
Yeah, which I very much like.
Yeah, I mean, like compare the like Will Smith as one of the most charismatic screen presences of all time to Charlie Sheen, and you know, like you've got John Voight in that.
Yeah,
Gene
Hackman.
The thing, and Gene Hackman, obviously, yeah, of course, and the tech guy, as I mentioned earlier, is Seth Green, is like properly well cast. There's also no mystery really in that. Like we know John Voight is the bad guy right from the beginning.
It's just a thriller, yeah.
Anyway, we're gonna do our Tony Scott Journeyman episode, and we'll cover Enemy of the State, which I'm a huge fan of. So I do respond to these kinds of films when they're done well. You know, when you've got charismatic characters, you've got like stylish direction, you've got you know, thrilling action, you've got well written dialogue. You know, it's not here at all. It's just not. It just doesn't work. Do you know what scene is really, really funny? I like cracked up at was the scene where the three conspirators meet on the pier, on the dock rather, and Linda Hamilton is taking photographs while Charlie Sheen in another location operates a little miniature tape recorder.
Yeah.
And he's recording the conversation, and then for reasons that are not clear to us, he decides to kind of move a little bit closer and reach his arm around over the boat, and then what does he do? He fucking presses like the tape falls out of the recorder into the water. It's like plop. And then Donald Sutherland says, "What was that?"
I think we should end there.
It's so daft.
As if that extra few inches of the arm extended is going to like pick up the recording anymore. Amazing, honestly.
But how does the tape fall out? Does he press? He press the eject button? It's so silly. Also, actually, one last thing is you mentioned in regards to Tombstone that everything looks kind of very kind of like a set and looks very kind of immaculate and everything. Yeah. There was a feeling that I was getting early on in this movie that the street that they're shooting on, where Linda Hamilton's apartment is located and where there's like a shootout earlier on, that it looked really fake. It looked like a studio street.
Yeah.
Which obviously like it is, you know, but there was something about it that like, and I was trying to figure out why. And my first thought was, is it the sound design? Is there something about the sound design that's like cluing me into that this is not real? Because I was looking for like something in the image that was a giveaway or something, and I couldn't find anything. But then later on, they're using the same thing and they're using the same sets, and it didn't feel that way. And I was thinking maybe it's like the lenses that they're using early on or something like that. Maybe they're using longer lenses, or I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was about it, but there was a sense of like almost like hilarious artificiality to the street scenes early on that I didn't pick up on.
It's not like the because you mentioned the lenses. It's not also those combined with like the Third Man style canting camera angles, is it? Which lends everything a kind of hokey studio bound feel.
I don't know. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but there was.
You know what? Fuck it. I only rented
maybe I'll go back and compare them
off Amazon Prime, but I'm going to re-rent it. I'm going to watch it again. With I feel like it can only benefit from a rewatch with everything that we've said in mind. But it's a 7 out of 10 for me. Somehow it's still 7. I liked it. Yeah, maybe it's
a 4 for me.
Maybe it should be a 6, but I'm going to stick to my guns here because on every other occasion I allow you to whittle my score down. Gradually wear me down.
It's a 4. It's a 4 for me.
4.
Yeah, 4 at best. Okay. So I have one project that Cosmatos was attached to after Shadow Conspiracy. Actually, the article that I read said that he was attached to it during post-production on Shadow Conspiracy, and it was a new version of Tarzan for 20th Century Fox. He said, I want to do it in the vein of Johnny Weissmuller with a huge canvas using animals, the forest and the jungle, and create a fantasy world of adventure which hasn't been done before. He said, I grew up with those films and always wanted to do stuff in the Raiders of the Lost Ark vein without taking it too seriously. That didn't happen. I don't think that film ever was produced. And I couldn't find any information on any other projects that he was attached to in the last years of his life. He died of lung cancer in 2005 at the age of 64. Okay, so we said at the top of the show that we were going to rank his films at the end.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what, I'll give you. We'll start at the bottom,
right?
And I'll give you my 10 to 6. Okay.
Your top 10 Cosmatos films, right?
My top 10 Cosmatos films, starting at number 10 with
surprise.
1997's Shadow Conspiracy.
Right.
4 out of 10.
Oof.
Right. Now, I a couple of these are pretty close. Like, that's definitely his weakest film. But
yeah.
Okay, so my number 9, I'm gonna go with Sin. That's number 9.
Okay.
I just think it's fatally flawed. It's the only film in his filmography that I would say has that like sense of like this just fundamentally doesn't work because it's like they tore pages out of the script. You know, we need to understand the relationship between those characters in order for anything that happens in the film to carry any kind of weight or have any sort of resonance, and we just don't.
Yeah,
and it just doesn't work as a result of that. Number 8 is Escape to Athena. Which is a complete mess, a complete shambles with you know, some action that works and some comedy that works and some style that works and some sort of like, you know, genre elements that intermittently sort of click, but overall, yeah, it's a complete mess. Those are both 5 out of 10.
Right.
I wouldn't quite say that I dislike either of those films. Okay, so that's tonight. So my number 7 is. My number 7 is The Cassandra Crossing.
Yeah.
That's 6 out of 10. I like the beginning. I like the end when it goes full tilt ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the midsection, the energy just drains out of the movie as quickly as it drains out of the infected passengers. And my number 6, my number 6, I'll say, is Rambo First Blood Part 2. Okay, so give me your 10 to 6.
Okay, so no prizes for guessing my number 10 then. It is Escape to Athena, which is the only one I've rated less than 6 out of 10, which is a 5. Probably a 4, to be honest, if I was forced to think about it again. 9 would be Sin. I agree with everything you've said. To be honest, it hadn't really dawned on me when I was watching it, or at least wasn't like something that was like distracting me from appreciating the film for other reasons. But it feels very much like a film that, for whatever reason, is undercooked. And that is a 6 out of 10 for me, and it's his 9th best film.
Like we said in relation to a lot of his films that he's really good with details.
Yes.
Sin for me is the only one that I'm focusing only on the details because there's nothing else there.
Yeah. It's true.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Number 8, Shadow Conspiracy. So that means our 8, 9, 10 are interchangeable. We agree on the bottom 3.
Yeah.
But just a different order. But Shadow Conspiracy is his best. It's his worst film that's rated 7 out of 10. I like it. My number 7, and I think also your number 7, which means the bottom 4 is the same but different orders. The Cassandra Crossing, which actually no. I'm gonna switch these round. Sorry, Shadow Conspiracy is higher than Cassandra Crossing. So Cassandra Crossing is my number 8, and Shadow Conspiracy is my number 7. If I may make that last minute change, and then where does that leave me? So I've got to give you my number 6, which is Of Unknown Origin, which is I think the first point at which we differ in terms of. Because you haven't given me that one yet, right? Of Unknown Origin. That's my number 6, and it's in your top 5. Okay.
That's
your number 6
okay.
was Rambo, First Blood Part 2, right?
First Blood Part 2. Yeah.
Of Unknown Origin for me.
Okay, so I'll give you my 5 to 3.
Okay.
My number 5 is Leviathan.
Right.
Yeah. My number 4. Ooh, it gets close around this point. So my number 4 is Tombstone.
Okay, right.
No, sorry.
No, you've said it now. You can't retract these things. No, go on, because I retracted one earlier, so I'll let you.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, completely confused there. So my number 4 is going to be Tombstone. Yeah.
So it is Tombstone.
It came down from. See, sorry, I got confused there for a second.
Right. Okay.
Because, yeah, on my rewatch, it would have been before I rewatched it. I probably would have been higher, but okay.
Right.
My number 4 is Tombstone. My number 3 is Massacre in Rome.
Okay.
Which is probably the film on the list. Probably the film on the list that surprised me the most.
Right.
Would I put that? Yes, yeah, it is. Yeah, it has to be.
My number.
Yeah, has to be number 3 because that's an 8.
My number 5 is Leviathan, so same as you. My number 4 is Rambo: First Blood Part 2, I think, which ultimately benefited from my previous familiarity with it, which and what that was. I think that was the first time I've watched it as like a certified adult cinephile as well, not just like a teen consuming action films. And it clarified a few things, and it made me appreciate it for reasons that when I was younger I wasn't able to. My number 3 then would be Massacre in Rome.
Okay. My number 2 then is Of Unknown Origin.
Yeah.
And my number 1 is Cobra.
So that's the biggest disparity between our places, I think. Your number 2 is my number 6. And so my number 2 is Tombstone, and my number 1 is Cobra. So we agree on number 1.
So our 1 to 10 are all the same, just in different orders.
But
that's the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? But it, inevitably with a filmography like this, apples and pears and all that, you're often. I mean, you've suggested. I mean, we were kind of flicking films around there as we were creating the top 10 or listing them.
Yeah.
They're all very interchangeable, and it's a bit like I don't want to be known as the guy who rates Rambo: First Blood Part 2 above Of Unknown Origin, even though I do. But they're all very sort of interchangeable around a certain point anyway. Not all of them, but the top 6, let's say, or top 7 even, are all good.
Sorry, what did you give? Did you give Cassandra Crossing a 7?
No, I give it a 6.
But you put it above Shadow Conspiracy.
No, I didn't, because I flicked them around.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. Is that allowed?
That's allowed.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, will we wrap it up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you for listening to The Journeymen. My name is Bobby Lowe, and I've been here with
Michael Pattison.
Please follow us on Twitter at _Journeyman and subscribe to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. Until next time.
Thank you.